All right, guys, welcome. I'm going to start the video on World War II. This will be the first part of World War II, and we're going to cover kind of the background before America officially gets involved in this war. So to start out, it all began in 1939 between two groups of people in Europe. You've got the Axis powers, which were Germany, Italy, and Japan. We're going to see how they begin to form together. And then the Allied powers of Great Britain, the United States, the Soviet Union, and France. And so these are the final sides. All of these groups were not together at the very beginning, but at the end is the Axis versus the Allied powers. So between the years of 1939 and 1941, Germany had come to power as a very strong nation, had joined forces with Italy. And so between Germany and Italy, they were able to take over a lot of what is today Western Europe. You can see here the ones in the yellow are the areas that were Axis powers. Okay, you've got Germany. Sorry about that. You've got Germany. You've got Italy, Austria. The yellow areas that have the green lines are the areas that the Axis invaded and controlled by 1941. And so if you look at that, that's the good majority of Western Europe. And even parts of Northern Africa were under the control of the Axis powers by 1941. Uh, the Allied nations are the ones in green. You have the Soviet Union and, of course, Great Britain, and then the other parts of Africa not taken over by the Axis powers. And then the countries in purple in 1941 are neutral. Now, a lot of those countries will end up choosing a side towards the middle of the war, but in the beginning of the war, they are neutral. Keeping in mind, World War I had just ended in 1919, and in 20 years ago, there was so much bloodshed and just chaos that Europe never wanted to experience that again. And so a lot of this is happening, and these countries are wanting to stay out of it. You notice that several cities are going to be bombed in the early 1940s by Germany, in particularly. And so our second map here shows throughout the world who supported the different sides. This doesn't necessarily mean that they sent troops, but they did provide support to these sides. You do notice here on this grand scheme of things is that most of the yellow, which is the Axis powers, is contained to right here. You also include Japan on this side. Most of the rest of the world was on the side of the Allies, and so they're going to provide support for those nations. All right, so the beginning of World War II happens because of the rise of a government policy known as fascism. Fascism is a political party that developed in Europe. Sorry about that. It was a way of organizing a society in which a government ruled by a dictator controls the lives of the people, and in which people are not allowed to disagree with the government. They put the needs of the country before everything else. And so, as you see in the picture there, the 11 steps to fascism are here, basically, how a country went about developing a fascist nation and the political parties. And keep in mind that after the war was over, Europe was decimated. They had no economic system, their political system was in ruins. The entire Western Europe was in a very bad place after World War One. And so these strong leaders began to take power in the 1920s and early 1930s, and they began to do many of these things, but in a way that people didn't really catch on that they were losing their powers and their voice in governments. And so you have the rise of fascism. You can see here some fascist governments such as Mussolini. One of the biggest things that they did is the youth were strong supporters of fascism, tended to believe that the government had their best interests at heart and therefore that they should support the government in all things. And so you have a lot of young people joining in with these fascist leaders because they promise them that we will get the economy going. They promise them that things will get better. And so these promises really influence that younger generation to jump on board with these government policies. In Italy, this man here was the leader of the fascist party. His name is Benito Mussolini. He was also known as Il Duce. And so he was the fascist leader in Italy. Germany is the more popular one. We know a lot about Germany. And so to kind of give you an idea, Germany, their economy was in ruins. Remember, they had been blamed for everything after World War One. And so a young man by the name of Adolf Hitler began to exploit this, and the people rallied behind him. Adolf Hitler was a born public speaker. He had a voice and a way of talking to people that no matter what he was talking about, people listened to him. And so in 1921, he joined the Nazi Party, which was the German Workers' Party. Today, it has very negative connotations. It was developed in the very, very, very beginning as a way to support workers who they needed after World War One. But it also became very anti-Semitic, which means anti-Jewish, and it became a form of fascism. This party grew in power, led by Adolf Hitler, who called himself the Fuhrer. He became Chancellor of Germany in 1933, which put him in a place of power. The Nazi Party had this idea of the master race, and so that's going to drive their party. They established a totalitarian state where it's a single party state where leader suppresses all opposition and controls every aspect of people's lives. And so that is what Hitler is going to do in Germany in the 1930s. 1933 was the height of his power in Germany. As you can see here, many people know Hitler's face. The books that you're seeing the children reading, that's once again, they influence the young. And I'm not talking about just teenagers. I'm talking about preteens, people going into school. When the totalitarian governments take over, they infiltrate the education system and tell the people this is what we're teaching the children and this is what they're going to learn. And they learn through a totalitarian type of government. Okay. And so the last thing I kind of want to cover here very quickly is the Nazi theory of race, because that has a huge impact on how they treat people. It was very unfounded and extremely racist. Their ideas were not supported by any other theories in history. The master race was said to be the most pure stock of the Aryan race, which they defined very, very radically. It wasn't a definition of who belonged to this race. It seemed to dominate the countries of Northern Europe, being from Norway and Switzerland and places like that. At the bottom of this hierarchy were the parasitic races. Okay, they were the subhumans. They were dangerous to society. The Nazi literature, which was the only literature allowed to be taught in schools, they called these people the Untermenschen, which was applied to the Slavic people of Russia, the Serbians, and Poles who were from Poland. The Nazis viewed these people as inferior, and they were fit only for extermination and enslavement. Those were the only ideologies that they taught. And so around 2 million non-Jewish Polish people were killed by Nazi Germans, not just Jews, but non-Jewish people as well, simply because they were Polish. The Jewish people, in fact, were even below the Slavic people. The Gypsies and the Jews, who were both eventually deemed to be life unworthy of life. And they were exterminated during the Holocaust. And so this really shows you the idea of this racist government that was being created, and people were following along because the economy was doing well. It's proven in history, you put money in people's pockets and put them into jobs and keep them happy. A lot of times government can do things and the people don't notice these things going on because they're being taken care of. So we've got to be very mindful of that. The last country is Japan. They were frustrated with a lot of their government and their economic problems. They became militaristic, which means the military leaders gained control of their government. They didn't really uphold to fascism, but it was very similar. In 1931, they're going to attack Manchuria, which is in China. Then in 1937, they are going to invade northern China. And once they do that, they are going to sign a pact with Italy and Germany and begin to call themselves the Axis powers. And so at this point, this is where you have the beginning of the formation of those Axis powers. And by 1937, you have a clear definition of who are the dictators and who are the democratic forms of government in the world. This is the end of the first section. Click the next video to be taken to the last section on the rest of the notes.